as these books were being written, we're thinking about the new VC and how it applies to classrooms and to teachers, and particularly to those teachers that are out of field. We know in history that we often have great teachers, but who perhaps sometimes don't have the historical background in their teacher training, or just required to fill up perhaps an English load. And again, often really good teachers, but there are obviously some people thrown into a history classroom who are very new to it. And when we were writing these books, that's something we were really conscious of. We wanted a design that could be used both by the really experienced teachers who use the textbook as a menu and they pick out the best bits of it, and also for someone who's walking in and perhaps found out the day before the year started that they're teaching history, and they've got a really nicely sequenced, thorough resource there that they can use for their teaching. We're obviously mindful also of the time allocated to history and the fact that this varies. And you'll see shortly that we have adopted more of a lesson-based structure as opposed to like a section on a theme that might run for 1 page or could run for 6 or 7 pages. We've trimmed that back into lesson-sized chunks of time. We've sort of aimed for 50 minutes, but there's being a fairly common lesson time. But of course, there's scope to increase, decrease. If you have more time, that's where you can build on this resource. If you have less time, that's where you can select what you think is most crucial for your students to know. But we've adopted this lesson-based structure. So each lesson's based, it's a ready-to-use lesson, clear inquiry question, engagement activity, the body of the lesson with skill and concept activities, and the review consolidation of knowledge questions as well. So is we've really worked to make the content more accessible and student friendly. And we do maintain the rigor because we believe it's important for the students to know lots about what's going on. There's a bit of a mock-up there of the kind of investigation planners that we offer. So with our lesson-based structure, we also develop this, it's essentially curriculum documentation that is also available editable that you can use as a starting point depending on what your school requires you to produce in terms of lesson documentation. So again, we've kind of aimed at 50-minute lessons, but of course there's scope to go much further and extend, and there's scope to reduce depending on what you require. So some of the new things we've got the lesson starters throughout the book. I'll show you some examples of those in a second. A wider range of activity types within lessons and within the end of lesson reviews. We've diversified the kinds of activities that we ask students to do. There's short activities, there's long activities, and our skill activities across the chapter, you'll see nearly all of the historical skills and concepts touched on in each chapter. We've also revamped our end of chapter tasks to support student reflection of what they learned and assessment. And again, it too serves as a bit of menu where you can use all of it, or you can pick out the bits that are going to work for you and what your students are doing to help really consolidate what they've learned in class and to enable them to go on and think critically and creatively about all this really interesting history that they've learned. I really like this aspect as well, which it will make more sense when you see an example. But in not all, but about 50% of our images, where the source is suitable for this, as well as the caption, we've put a little question there, and I'll talk more about that when I show you an example. And we have really strengthened the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices and perspectives throughout this. You've heard a bit from Gurul a bit earlier about their input and some really interesting teacher and student resources that they've developed. And of course, a heavy influence right through the entire book to help teachers confidently and respectfully teach First Nations Australia history. I'm just going to show you some examples now. So lesson starter activities. These are cool. They can go for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you can't kind of use them how you like. It could be discussion, it could be students working silently, but it's a really good way to, you get the students in the room and you get this up on the board or however you want to set it up, and they're going straight away. and they're looking at sources. And we've got a huge variety of these lesson starter activities. We've got physical sources, we've got written sources, we've got thinking routines, we've got lesson starters that link to prior knowledge, we've got lesson starters that kind of activate knowledge about the topic they're about to learn. So we do have considerable variety in these starters, and I think they're a really cool addition. Every lesson has one concept and skill builder activity, and throughout the chapter, this varies. So we look at all the different concepts and skills. Sometimes we have a look at a couple of skills in one activity. Again, a huge variety of how these work. Heaps of working with sources, perspectives to emphasize that reinforced praising in the curriculum. And then at the end of the chapter as well, the concepts and skills are really important in our end of chapter reviews. Our history follow the end of chapter review activity structure as follows. So there's a brain dump activity where they're recalling what they remember, because obviously retrieving helps strengthen that memory. We've got visible thinking activities to help students think more deeply about the content, a whole range of practice questions, short and longer questions, and an inquiry reflection activity as well within that section. A bit difficult to read, I understand, on the screen, but you can see there. So the brain dump was on the previous slide. We have a circle of viewpoints. Is our thinking visible? A whole range of practice questions there. Some short things, longer questions, and really you can use them in whatever way you want. They could be the starting point to build an inquiry task. If the students are doing something like a test, they're fantastic practice questions. They could serve as prompts for research projects as well.